All right, there we go. We're on. Hi, everyone. Hi. So great to be here with all of you. So, the topic today is reimagining leadership for thriving movements. We at Leading Forward have been doing some research recently, talking to folks, and we're hearing that a lot of funders are saying about a third of the grantees in their portfolio either have just gone through, are going through, or are about to go through a leadership transition. We know that, the pandemic really shifted the way that people think about how they resource their lives. And many women of color who have been leading movements have been stepping away and doing something different so that they can better protect their mental and physical health. And so as we're making these hard choices about how we resource our lives in ways that are healthy, our organizations are often left in the middle of chaos and in the middle of a transition. And so we're going to talk about how we can think about, how we may shift how we think about leadership to ensure that we don't continue to kind of grind down on folks and continue these burnout factories when we're consistently losing ground in our movements. So I'm Melissa Sines. I am one of the people we're talking about. I left the world of W-2s for the world of 1099 about 2 years ago. Best choice I've ever made. I don't think I'll ever go back. So I help form a consulting collective. We are a worker co-op, and we have all said how much the quality of our lives has improved. But today, here, I'm representing one of our client partners, Leading Forward, which I mentioned. Leading Forward is a new funder organizing movement working to provide guidance to funders to implement practices that promote investments in more equitable leadership transitions. So we help provide connections, resources, and a community that address the practical needs around transitions while working to catalyze a broader shift within the sector. And so today I have two amazing women with me. We're going to dive into this topic, but first let me ask them to take a minute to introduce themselves.
First, thank you for that really warm introduction. Thank you for the jumpsuit. I respect and appreciate your choices.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Today. I'm really delighted to be here with all of you, really the best and the brightest in our sector, thinking about the ways that we can better support the leaders who are quite literally on the front lines of the greatest social justice battles of our era. But first I'll say that after the last few days with all of you, I am feeling really inspired and hopeful that we are up to the challenge. Quickly before I go on, I just want to take a moment to express some gratitude for our colleagues at the Women Funding Network for creating this really beautiful and intentional container to have these really important conversations. Thank you to the good folks at the Eden House. I feel like the ways that I've been held here have been really unparalleled. My name is Shawnda Chapman. My pronouns are she and her. Thank you for that. I feel like we all need a little affirmation every now and then. Thank you. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the director of innovative grant making and research at the Ms. Foundation for Women, where for the last 50 years, our work has focused on building the social, political, and economic power of women and girls in the United States. More recently, our work has focused very specifically on supporting women and girls and non-binary people of color nationally, but especially in areas that are traditionally overlooked by philanthropy. At Ms., I hold our Activist Collaboration and Care Fund, our Girls of Color initiative, and I lead and shape some of our research efforts. I think more importantly, though, it's important to note that I come to this work from a really deep and abiding love for my people, for Black people, for queer people, for trans folks, for folks who have been pushed to the margins, I identify as someone who is a Black American with Southern roots, a queer person, someone who has been directly impacted. I'm also a student. I am a third-year PhD at the, yes for that. It's dragging me, so yes for that. I'm at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York. And I really, really, really believe in the power and the ability of the folks who are on the ground, many of them in this room, to do the work to get us where we need to go.
What's up, y'all? My name is Brandi Collins-Calhoun. My pronouns are they, she. I am the Movement Engagement Manager with the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. We are a funder, organizer, and watchdog. And I hold the work within our Movement Investment Project where we have conversations with funders about moving more money to the front lines in an equitable and just way. I specifically focus on feminist issues. I come from abortion organizing. I'm a reproductive justice organizer. And similar, I come to this work from burnout. I was in movements, I was a birth worker, and doing work and having consistent conversations about the Black maternal mortality crisis. And it wore me down, and I had to exit the work so that I could be here to parent my Black child. And I came to this work so that I can organize and help funders get to a point where they can really sustain the folks holding this work. And I want to say I appreciate this space. I really want to name that I appreciate the organizers that are in this room. I know that it is not easy being on the front lines and being in rooms with funders. Sometimes it's humbling, it can be exhausting. And also I just want to hold space for the folks that have a different radical definition of feminism than some of the conversations that have been happening. Because there has been some discomfort and uncomfy conversations, and I urge folks to go back to that meditation room. I went there before this session. Get you some essential oil and get your jam on and get centered and grounded so that you can be here and be in these conversations. But yeah, at NCRP, I'm sure I've probably been on some calls with many of you, especially women's foundations, so that we can have conversations around what it looks like to really invest in reproductive justice, especially in this crucial moment, beyond what's already happening. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation and be in this room with all of y'all.
All right, let's dive in. So we're gonna start, with the conversation grounding in what we see happening right now, right? And so just interested to hear from your all's perspective, why are leadership transitions happening so rapidly right now? What's happening? Why are people leaving? And what impact are you seeing that that's having on the movements?
That's a really big question. It's a really big question, and I think it's difficult to find a place to enter there, right? I think, I imagine the first thing is to get really specific about the questions we ask, because they really directly affect both our understanding of the problem and the solutions. So when we say things like, why are folks leaving? Who are the folks we are talking about? Why does it matter? What is the historical context? What are their unique needs and experiences? And how do the solutions we develop address them? So first for me, I think it's important to name that when you ask that question for me, I'm thinking about the leadership of women, girls, and non-binary people of color specifically. And I think one of the important things to know up front is that this is not a natural matriculation of people out of the sector. People are being pushed out because the work is unsustainable personally, professionally, and organizationally. As an organization that centers women and girls of color in our strategy and our funding, at MIS, we keep hearing from activists and leaders that we work with about how they continue to do that work, whether it's supported by the philanthropic sector or not. We hear from these folks who we've just really named that, are really crucial to the future of our country, to the future of our democracy, that they don't get the opportunities or the support that they need to thrive. This, of course, has been true throughout history, but in this moment, we know that Black and brown folks are expected to do more with less, and not just less, but a lot less. My team at MIS is in the process of finalizing a report that is really relevant to this conversation. The report is entitled Living with Pocket Change, How Women of Color Do More with Less, and it looks at the multi-level impact of chronic disinvestment and underinvestment in leaders, organizations, and movements by and for women and girls and non-binary people of color. And it builds on the original study that we did that found that total philanthropic giving to women and girls of color in the US was $356 million in 2017, the best in last year that we have data for so far, which is about $5.48 per year per women and girl of color. $5 whole and less than 50 cents. And this accounts for about 0.5% of the total $66.9 billion given by foundations that year. And so, as it relates to why people are leaving, we found a lot of really important things. And I'm going to share just a few of those things with you because I feel like we'll get into a lot of it as the discussion progresses. I think first, listen, I don't even know how more plainly I can say it because organizations, people, women of color in philanthropy have been saying, we don't fund them like we want them to win, right? That's like the best and easiest answer. I couldn't distill it down to anything sort of easier to understand than that. I will say that the people that we talk to are doing a lot of invisible labor. And that labor is invisible for a host of reasons. They're doing invisible labor in their homes, but they're also doing invisible labor in their organizations. And they have to do that labor because working with the people that are sort of affected by the most challenges in our country requires that you can't program with people until their most basic needs are met. So people are, doing that work out of their own pockets, taking from the energy that they have to give to families, and they can't exactly explain that to funders because we think that they're all over the place. We think that they're not strategic, if they're explaining all the work that they're doing. We also found, thank you, you say that again, right? We also found that they have really grand visions for change, much bigger, I think, than folks in philanthropy can conceptualize. But they feel like they only given a fraction of the resource they need to do that work in any given time. And I'll read to you a quote from one of our participants that it troubles me like regularly. And so what she said is, I'm trying to run an organization always at an eighth of a tank full. I can never stay at a half a tank. I'm never at 3/4, and the tank is never full, right? How do you say, I'm going to take a road trip, and I'm only ever going to be given an eighth of a tank of gas? It makes it so that you always have to stop and figure out how you're going to fill the tank up. That in and of itself takes so much capacity that it actually limits you from doing the work because you're always in a money crunch. So how do you actually continue to do the work if you're always in survival mode, right? I would say another really important thing to really think about, sort of thinking about the historical context, is that women of color are really describing their experiences of disinvestment and underinvestment in their own personal leadership, right? So they're taking, they're usually taking leadership of organizations that often are in crisis, right? It's like we will not give the women of color leadership positions until it's falling apart. So they do that, and they have to sort of make up for these years of neglect, right? And they have to see that the ways that years of neglect sort of, it impacts their ability to fundraise, it impacts their ability even just sometimes to know how to make an ask, And so, I think another thing I just want to note is that they end up then having to make up, for leadership, for sort of historical underinvestment in the leadership of their staff. So they're investing a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money into sort of making up for those leadership deficits. And then they aren't able to afford to retain those staff, who are, recruited from organizations who can pay them more. And so these are things that sort of all are really, really, this is a systemic problem, right? And so for me, the conversation requires a systemic address. And so before we can even, get to the point where we're like, oh, okay, well, what do we do to support them through the leadership? Like, let's actually consider why they're leaving in the first place and what our role is in sort of creating the conditions that are forcing them to leave.
I'm gonna try to follow that. Damn. So I know I mentioned when I was introducing myself, the part where I'm like, there are folks in this room who have a different definition of feminism than other people in this room. And it's really important to acknowledge that that is why some people are leaving leadership positions where they are. At NCRP, we did research on funding data around reproductive rights, reproductive justice, reproductive health, and how funding was being distributed around that. $1.7 billion went to reproductive rights work from 2015 to 2019. A majority of those folks, though, are folks that are on the front lines that I know that are doing reproductive justice and access work and having to manipulate and do all the things just to get funding because folks are only wanting to give money to the rights part of this work. So there's that. There's some differences in definition and how people are defining the work. We're here talking about feminism. Is your feminism driven by first wave white feminism, or are you operating from the leadership of folks like the Combahee River Collective, Black Feminist Future, folks that are really deeply rooted in this? Because if you're funding in a way, the first example, it's not what's gonna get us free, and it's not what's gonna get the folks on the front line to liberation. And that's leading to a lot of burnout, and that's where this mass exit is really happening. I've been doing reproductive justice work, I'll say a decade now, which feels wild when I say it, but I have watched a lot of amazing people exit this work for their well-being, for their mental health, for their physical health, and I miss my people, and I didn't think that at 32 that I'd be doing this work without some of the people that I started this work with. And I'm grieving them not because they've left this world, but they left this work. And it's because they weren't being funded, they weren't being sustained, they weren't able to take mental health leave. I know abortion doulas that were doing this work before Dobbs was a conversation that had to leave because their jobs couldn't give them the help to go to therapy. They didn't have those benefits. Folks are leaving as an act of self-preservation. And that's scary, and it's gonna continue to happen. And right now, folks are like, oh, we're in these dire times. These times were here a decade ago. These were here 20 years ago. There are conversations that we're having in the reproductive justice movement with folks that have been doing this work well over 10 years, and they're seeing the same things happen to us that happen to them. There are folks that are still in this work that I can't believe are in this work. I would have left if I was some of them, the way that funders carry on. And I'm thankful for them. But that's a big reason for this mass exit that we're seeing, and it's really scary and concerning. The other thing, and y'all, my notes are on my phone. I am, like I said, I'm 32. My phone is my life. But the other big thing is the trust deficit between organizations and funders. Funders, I've had conversations with folks that are like, I don't know that I can trust them with that kind of funding. And that is wild, because if you should be able to trust anybody, it's the folks that are on the front lines and really know what's happening. But the other thing is the way that funding is happening is causing so much distrust amongst movement organizations because they're having to be secretive about who's giving them money. Folks are treating funding like people were treating salaries. They're not talking about how much they get, and that's dangerous. It's causing distrust, it's causing tension, and it's hard for us to do this work as a collective if we can't trust each other. But that tension is happening because of funders, because the ways that they're defining feminism, the ways they're defining reproductive justice, and it's hurting the movement. It's hurting the people that are trying to access care. It's hurting the folks that we have at home. So it's really important and essential that that shift happens, because we're gonna continue to see this mass exit year after year after year. And then who's gonna be left on the front lines to do the work? Because I don't want my daughter to have to do this shit. I want her to be able to enjoy her 30s. I'm tired, but yeah.
Right.
I'll just add to that really quickly. I would say in the research that we did, nearly every single person of the 15 people that we talked to, and that's a small number, but every one of them described some experience of not baby burnout, I need to go for a weekend at the spa, but deep, significant, and profound burnout. So much so that it was one of the things that really started to worry me. And I thought to myself, we attend to sort of all of the other instruments that sort of get us there. I think that our copy machines maybe get more attention than sometimes the actual leaders who are on the front lines. And the way that that happens is unsustainable. So I think that anybody that is really sort of committed to and interested in making sure that we get some progressive wins, because I feel like the last number of years we have been, we've been taking it in not fun places. We've been getting it handed to us in ways that, I'm like, friends, do we like how this feels? I don't know. Maybe do a couple of things differently. But they also really described systemic racism in philanthropy. There's no way around sort of that description of the ways in which people are having to navigate racist and sexist microaggressions. When you talked about trust deficits, they're very, directly related to experiences of race and gender. And so I think that, if we are serious, about shifting, then we have to think about those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to tie us back to a couple of recent movements in philanthropy, right, to start to address some of the issues of systemic racism and of lack of that trust deficit, right? And so one is trust-based philanthropy, right? Another is thinking through like how we shift power in the sector or share power more equitably with our nonprofit partners. Both of these may be our short-term band-aids that mostly are kind of on an individual basis. A foundation may choose to enter into trust-based philanthropy with their grantees. They may choose to shift power, but it doesn't actually change the system that everybody is operating within. And so thinking about those, like trust-based philanthropy, the movement to shift power, what's working, what's not working?
Ooh, it's a lot that's not working, but
I like big questions. I like big questions.
Big question. So I'll say this, and when I think about trust-based philanthropy, one thing that NCRP did with that data, so we made a roadmap regarding abortion access and the importance of getting creative and looking at the different pathways to funding it. And in that, we have a phenomenal research team that I don't think I'd have a job if we didn't have them. I love them. But these are people. Like, data is great, but these are people. And one thing that I think is working and I would like to see more of is people leaning on storytellers and not just data from grant reports. And that's across movements. I'm saying this as somebody from repro work. Abortion storytellers should have been a strategic tool for philanthropy well before now. You should have been having conversations with abortion storytellers decades ago. Birth storytellers. We've been talking about Black maternal health for a very long time. And up until maybe a few years ago, I wasn't really seeing funders, movements were, but I was not seeing funders sharing the stories of the people impacted by the Black maternal health crisis. I was just seeing that number, that 3 to 5 times more likely to die. I wasn't hearing the stories of that 3 to 5 times. I was just seeing that number. So really leaning on storytellers for sure. And then the other space for me is getting creative. Like I mentioned in my last response that, folks are getting reproductive rights funding, but they're abortion funds. So they're having to drive people to abortions and drive to the Capitol if they want funding. Like, they can't just focus on the practical support, they have to do the policy too, because that's what they're getting funding for. They shouldn't be the ones getting creative, it should be the funders. If you're funding childcare, you should figure out, hey, you know what, let's hit up this abortion fund and let's figure out how to give them stipends, because a good percentage of the people that are getting abortions are already parents, and you can't bring your child with you to your abortion appointment. So abortion funds are having to pay for people's childcare so that they can access abortions. They're having to pay somebody to help somebody care for their child when they're home recovering from their abortion. If you're funding childcare, get creative. It's those kind of things and those kind of strategies and tactics that I think will make the dollar go further in the reach. And it's not on the movements to figure that out. It's on y'all. It's on the funders to get creative. So yeah.
It's interesting. +1 first. I will say though, as a researcher, I have a different orientation toward data. And I understand the power of data and sort of what it can do. I also think that stories are data. And so I sometimes want to push back on people who don't necessarily, people are like, we don't want data, we want stories. Stories are data. They're a different way of relating to the data. They ask you to engage differently with your senses. And it compels you to action from a different place, often from here. And I'm glad that stories inspire people, but what will they inspire you to do is actually sometimes the thing that is important to me. And I think about, I would say that one of the things that we heard that sort of was most important, I think, was that trust-based philanthropy was the bare minimum thing you could do. If you are not doing trust-based philanthropy, see somebody in the back of the room, they'll walk you through how that needs to go, essentially streamlining, reporting, minimizing burdens. Like at this point, friends, like we need to be having a different conversation if you do not know that what you need to be doing is trust-based philanthropy. Now that part is said, and you don't get you do not get cookies, like you do not get stars, you do not get a parade if what you are doing is trust-based philanthropy. You are doing the bare minimum. Yes, yeah, who in the back? Thank you. Yeah. Right, the bare minimum. And our good friends at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project have done a lot of work, to make sure that they that people know, sort of what it means to be doing trust-based philanthropy. But what we found was that it's not enough. What we heard was that the people we spoke with wanted to include an ethic of care. They wanted to know that the people that were funding them were invested in them holistically, them as people, the communities that they care about. They wanted a different relationship with funders, one where they feel like their work was seen and understood. They wanted to, be shaping philanthropy just as much as sort of philanthropy was shaping their work. And I think those are the really sort of fundamental shifts that reposition sort of them in relationship to power and resources. I would say there were a few things that they talked about, around sort of not just wanting folks to give them money and leave them alone, but to be in really deep and authentic relationships with their funders.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I love that. Trust-based philanthropy at a minimum. Hopefully you don't treat that like the 5% minimum. So yeah, and I think that there is, as we think about practical application in the moment to supporting organizations who are going through leadership transitions, right? Like that is, like I said, a good part of many funders' portfolios. So oftentimes funders will think about, oh, we need to fund a transition consultant, right? Here's $25,000, $40,000 to help support the transition consultant. An actual transition budget is actually more like, I don't know, depending on the size of the organization, $150,000 to $500,000. Because what you could and should be resourcing are things like paying interim leadership that's focusing on the change management and the organizational assessment and setting things up for the future. Paying existing staff to pick up that extra work. Individual and group coaching, staff and board retreats, wellness and sabbaticals, and rest and relaxation for people, and resourcing a moment and a pause for deep community listening for folks, right? And so at those moments of transition, so often funders will, take a wait and see. Let's see how this new leader does. Let's see how they do on choosing the new leader. Let's see if this is going to work out before we decide whether we're going to continue to fund this organization, which is the exact opposite of shifting power and trust-based philanthropy, where you need to lean into not just supporting the leader or exiting leader, but the incoming leader, and getting them, kind of onboarded and set up for success. because oftentimes during that moment of transition, there can be this 2 to 3 year lag in an organization's progress while they're dealing with change management. And so funders, I think, have a really important role to play beyond this basic, trust-based philanthropy, shifting power, being more participatory in the way that you engage with your grantees, but then also giving that extra support when it's needed. So these, trust-based philanthropy, shifting power, really funding in the moment of transition are all kind of, like I said, short-term strategies. They, help in the moment, but it doesn't address the overall system that we're working within, right? So beyond applying these individual solutions, as we think about, we're here, we're trying to create this world where we all thrive, where we're free of oppression, a world where we feel joy every day, where our work is aligned with our values and we don't leave at the end of the day feeling burnt because we've had to live in this dichotomous place all day. So what are some specifics as you think about how we can solve for this long term? What are the changes that need to be made in the system? The big system, the big question, that would shift the relationship between funders and the organizations that they're funding, and that would shift so that we're better supporting Black, brown, and queer leaders. Take a deep breath, y'all. Whew.
I know. It felt really just good to do. I don't know why. I'll say, just off the bat, first, and we talked about this, really thinking about the whole ecosystem and considering the things that are pushing folks out in the first place, right? I feel like, what is it, a pound of cure is worth an ounce of prevention, sort of a thing. And I think the second thing is to normalize transitions. I think that especially as it relates to women of color, as it relates to trust deficits, leaders are already not trusted. And so the transitions usually, they make people more skeptical about the competence of leaders and organizations. And, I would say this thing just because it's lunchtime and you said it should be fun. I want to fund Republicans, right? And go with me on this one, right? Just go with me. Go with me. Let me tell you something. If you hate the gays, Republicans want to give you money. If you hate the Blacks, Republicans want to give you money. I want to fund women of color leaders like that. You're doing good work, let's give you money. That's all. That's all, right? I want to, whoever is in the back, that person, thank you. Thank you very much.
Giving us life, thank you.
Yeah, I would say the people that we work with, they put it all on the line, they throw it all on the wall, and I trust what they're doing. And I want to fund them like that, So yeah, I think that is probably the first thing. I'd say further than that, to really be thinking about supporting the long game. So really funding intermediaries and public foundations who have deep and close relationships with folks. I would say thinking about funding the self-directed capacity building for women of color leaders, right? They know more than we know what they need. And I'll say that again, they know more than we know what they need. And lastly, I'd say invest in women of color's wellness, power, and influence. So be thinking about consciously building the next pipeline of new leaders, to be thinking about ways that we increase representation of women of color in philanthropy, things like asking for, a needs-based budget, and thinking about helping grantees do things like leverage new funding. And then the last thing I'll say are things like building the evidence base and strengthening accountability, right? It's a shame that what we're working from is 2017 data. Like, we have to do better about that if what we're serious about is really sort of in proactively supporting folks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brandi, thoughts?
So, I'm gonna say that y'all should be funding people that look and screw like me. You need to be funding Black and brown people, queer people, trans, non-binary folks. Like, that needs to be the goal, which many of you are doing, but be a little more firm and assertive about it. And hire organizers. I will say NCRP took a chance on me, and to my understanding, it is one of the best things they ever did. So I've been told in my evaluations. But no, like, honestly, when they reached out to me, I still don't know how Aaron and them got my resume, but somebody, Janae Lewis, had called me, and she was like, yeah, I'm with the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. I was like, ma'am, I'm anti-capitalist. I'm not coming over there and working with y'all. That is not my calling. That is not what my mama want me doing. And
then they were like, we'll pay you this much.
actually, no. We a PSO, so we all right. But no, but I mean, like I said, I was burned out. I was like, all right, let me see what y'all doing over here. And I like it here. It's fun. It's a good time. It's cute. And we've hired more organizers since then. And those of you that are familiar with NCRP and have seen us transition just in the last 3 years, that is what happens when you hire organizers. That is what happens when you bring us on and invest in us. The other thing is, when you hire organizers, invest in them so that when they leave you, you can brag about it. You can say, this person worked here. Like, they need to exit your fund, your organization, better than how they showed up. And the other thing is, y'all need to be investing in mass mobilization. If you really want a reach, if you really want to get to the folks on the ground in the front lines, you need to be investing in people that are mobilizing like hell. Like, when I think about how I got activated and got into this work, it was because somebody mobilized and I got on a bus with them. And I was like, oh, I like it here. And it was on a bus that I was telling somebody, I started this work as a doula. I was doing birth justice work. And I was explaining it to somebody. I think we were coming up to DC from Greensboro for something. I don't know. But it was a bus full of other Black folks, and it was a good old time, and I was talking about the work I was doing. And they was like, baby, it's a name for that. It's reproductive justice. And I was like, it's birth work. Like, I'm not. And then, like, I read up on it and studied it, and now that's the work that I do. But that happened, I got activated because of mass mobilization, because I was on a bus with a bunch of Black folks from the South talking about what I love to do, what I felt like I was called to do. And they were like, there's a name for it. Here's who you need to talk to. Here's how you get activated. Here's where you work. Here's what you do. Take care of yourself, rest, fuck these people, whatever. Like, they was like, do it. Take care of yourself, though. And I didn't always listen. And that's how I ended up burned out. But now, thankfully, I'm in a position where I can have conversations with folks like y'all and say, hey, this is who's doing the work. This is how you need to support them. Don't go over there bothering my people if you're going to hurt them. I'm telling y'all that right now. If you're going to hurt folks in the movement, don't tell them I sent you. You didn't hear from me. But, like, I got to go back to them. Y'all have to invest in them. Y'all have to care for them. Those of you that are funding birth justice, people holding that work, doula programs, I know that y'all are very happy with the work you do, but those numbers that y'all talk about, those are the people in the room with the people that are dying. When you're funding them, do you consider funding their wellness, their therapy, so that they can go home and care for their kids or care for themselves? Because I can guarantee any doula that you're funding is a doula in a million ways. They're not just birth doulas, they're life doulas, they're the community doula, the neighborhood doula, the auntie doula, they the corner store doula, whatever. But they taking care of a lot of other people, and they can't take care of themselves if you just funding their doula bag with their ball and their knee pads and stuff. They need therapy. Funding their wellness, funding their care, funding their sustainability, and, like, be creative with it. Have them at the table. Ask them what they really need. I know some of y'all are doing it, but are you listening when you ask them what do they need? Are you hearing them? Or are you just taking bits and pieces away that your trustees say are okay? Push back on your trustees. If they say we can't do it, keep pushing. Because they're standing in the way of a lot of liberation. Board members, EDs are standing in the way of liberation. Program officers, I know, are driven and want to do it. Some of them are telling me, they said I can't. That's not enough. Push, keep pushing. And if they got beef, call me, because that's what NCRP paid me to do, is to call up your trustees and be like, hey, why not? What's the problem? Here's how to do it. Here's a Black feminist-led organization that can tell you how to do it. Pay them. But yeah, my bad.
Yes.
That turned into a tangent.
No, it was good. It was
be
good.
trying.
You did drop the F-bomb. I'm just saying. So yeah, I think that's a really essential point, right? And one of my own like kind of personal bugaboos is that idea around the pay gap between philanthropy work and nonprofit work. And if you look at what a typical CEO at a private foundation is making versus what a grassroots movement organization leader is making, it's so wide. It says, and you go down the line, CEO to program officer versus a program director, a grants manager on the philanthropy side versus the grants manager on the nonprofit side. It's a really big gap. And then they're also missing things like health insurance, life insurance, income protection for disability, all of these other things that, as a former nonprofit worker, I didn't have. I didn't have that. And once that comes into your life, once you have that comfort, everything starts to open up, right? And so whenever we say, pay us, that's how important that is. And I would say, really, as you think about the value of the work of philanthropy versus the value of the work of movements, pay them what you're paying yourselves. Yeah. So we've got our little clocky countdown here. We have time for a couple final thoughts before we release folks. Anything else you want to add, you want people to walk away with here today?
I think I'd really like to just appreciate the both of you for sort of being here, being candid, being open, and saying all the things that need to be said. I don't believe I could say it any better. I just almost put my mic down and just got up and walked off the stage, Brandi, but I don't think that's what we're supposed to do here. Yeah. Thank you. And thank all of you for really taking your time to sit here and to be here and to really be engaging with us and to be thinking about this, because I can assure you that we will continue to lose if we don't do something different. So thank you all, and I look forward to being in deeper relationship with you and conversation with you. I hope you read our report when it comes out, Living with Pocket Change, How Women of Color Do More with Less. And yeah.
I want to thank y'all too. I don't really be doing this kind of carrying on stages, so I'm glad that I get to do it with y'all, because I was nervous. I ran to the back, y'all, to that meditation space and put peppermint oil on my hands. If y'all saw me up here doing all of this, it's because I was stressed. But I also want to thank WFN. So when I first, like I said, I don't come from philanthropy, but my first conference when I started at NCRP was right before lockdown, and it was Grant Makers for Girls of Color. And that space, I was like, oh, I'm where I need to be. I was like, okay, like this is okay. Like I should have took this job. Things are happening. Folks are having the hard conversations. Folks that look like me, folks that care for me. And then lockdown happened, and I was isolated. And there have been many of times that I've been like, okay, maybe this isn't where I should be. And this is like my first real conference since COVID started. And I'm glad that it was this, because I have that feeling again, being in this space with y'all, the same feeling that I had at Grant Makers for Girls of Color. Because conversations like this, and because like I'm looking out here and like I'm getting the snaps and I'm seeing the smiles in the head nods, and that feels good and it feels affirming, but it's also like I know that it's not performative. I know that like it's intentional and y'all mean it because y'all care. And I thank y'all for that. I thank WFN. And yeah, this was fun. I didn't cry or throw up here or nothing.
I know. We all did great. So, as we close, I just want to, kind of close with a reminder, right? Like, what is possible if we unleash the creative and strategic power of all of the Black, brown, and queer leaders currently tied up writing grant reports at 3 a.m.? What is possible? All right, thank you, ladies. Thank you, WFN. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.